Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1157, Wednesday, June the 10th, 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. Of course, it is Wednesday, and you know that is the day that I take out the trash and have some chicken. And this evening I will be having chicken fettuccine, chicken feta, whatever it is, Alfredo. You know what it is. Yes. And yes, let's go ahead and get to the news of the day. There's a lot of things going on in the past 24 hours. Plus, it's been a couple of slow days for Spygate over the last 2 weeks because, you know, the coronavirus, and then we get hit with the riots and everything else. So Spygate things have kind of been pushed on the back burner. But I wanted to take this opportunity to get back to those transcripts that were released back a few weeks ago from the House Intelligence Committee's Russia investigation, because there was, you know, 30, 40, some odd, no, there was 53 total transcripts there, and I still had only read about 5 or 6. So I definitely want to get to the Susan Rice testimony. So I had a chance to go through the Susan Rice testimony last night, and I just want to talk about that very briefly and then move on to the news of the day. So anyway, looking at the Susan Rice testimony, first the thing that you have to understand here is that her attorney, again, she's got 4 lawyers representing her, and the main lead lawyer, again, Kathleen Rumler, Obama's fixer lawyer. Now, why do we see that Obama's fixer lawyer, Kathleen Rumler, seems to be the lead attorney for all of his administration officials that were involved in the Russia investigation and his administration? Well, I think there's, you know, a couple good reasons for that. Number one, Obama wants the intel by having his lawyer there representing these people. He will find out what questions are being asked, and therefore he will know what they know. And so it's sort of an intelligence operation for Obama to have his fixer lawyer in there representing all of his admin officials. And also she's there to protect Obama. She's there representing Rice, but she's there to protect Obama. Remember, it's Remler and then 3 other lawyers who rarely say anything. She does most of the talking. And she's very argumentative and feisty, just as she is in all these other interviews, trying to keep these individuals from having to comment on certain things. And so she serves as kind of a blocking mechanism too. And of course, she represents a lot of Democrats in general. So I think that that's all that's going on there. Now, it should be noted in the Susan Rice testimony, of all the ones I've read so far, hers was by far the most heavily redacted. I would say about 25% at least of Susan Rice's testimony is redacted. Not blacked out, it's in red. It's blacked out, but it's red. It's not black, it's red, just red. You'll get huge swaths of paragraphs in red. And most of the blacked or redded out areas of her testimony have to do with unmasking and leaking. Unmasking and leaking. In fact, at the very beginning of the hearing, Trey Gowdy wants to talk about just unmasking in general. And there is a good probably 10-minute back and forth before they could even get started in the hearings with Remler arguing with Trey Gowdy about, wait a minute, I thought we were here to specifically talk about the Russia investigation, and you're wanting to talk about general unmaskings, and then they have to have an argument about whether or not, well, Trey Gowdy's like, well, there were unmasking issues as a part of the Russia investigation, and they had to go hash all that out. But she was constantly interjecting throughout. Whenever Republicans were asking questions, she would constantly interject and try to block Susan Rice from having to answer questions and things that she thought was out of bounds for this type of questions, or the nature of this particular questioning, which is supposedly about Russiagate. And she would keep saying, hey, I think that falls outside the perimeter of what we're supposed to be here for, blah, 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 the whole 9 yards. And it also should be noted that all these again, these are all timed. There's only a certain amount of time that these people were offering up. Susan Rice was only there for just a couple of hours. She only gave them like 2 hours, 3 hours of testimony. She was there at like 9 and out of there at 1, something like that, 1:10. And there's a lot of procedural things that happen first, and so it's not a full 3 hours of questioning. There's a lot of bickering and back and forthing with lawyers and things and such. But something you notice all throughout her testimony, which shows you that she's got a lot to hide, and she is a hardcore liar, is that in almost every time that Trey Gowdy or one of the Republicans got her pinned down on something, she would then use the phrase, not, she would be asked something, she'd say, well, to the best of my recollection. She must have used the phrase, to the best of my recollection, 100 times. Any time that Gowdy or another Republican got her pinned down on something, she would give very long, she would go into very long diatribes that never really addressed the actual question. Just very long diatribes that they would have to sit through and listen to. She's filibustering, right? She's filibustering her answers, going into these long diatribes, never directly answering the question, which would cause the Republican, Gowdy or whoever, to come back and hit her with the question again, more defined. And when she finally was pinned down, she would come back with, well, you know, to the best of my knowledge, something like that. But I can't be sure. I'd have to go back and look at that actual intelligence, or almost every question that she answered was, to the best of my recollection. Why is that? Because she's giving herself, setting herself up, so in the future, if that particular lie, she gets caught in a lie, she can say, well, I didn't say yes or no, I said to the best that I could remember. I guess I just didn't remember it. See, it's the same thing the rotten Reverend Clinton does, and they're coached by the same type of slimy lawyers. So, when you go through her testimony, you don't really get much out of her. Just like Loretta Lynch, just like Ben Rhodes, you don't get really much out of these people, because on the key points, they tell you they can't remember. They would have to have other materials that they don't have in front of them. They can't recollect. And then when you get them pinned down, they will never give you the yes or no. It's always got to be a can't remember, can't recall, to the best of my recollection. These types of phrases that are just built into everything that they're saying. So this is how they avoided actually answering any real questions. And this is all through these hearings. They never really get pinned down. And they don't allow themselves to get pinned down like that. I don't know if they can get away with that in a court like where they would be with, say, John Durham in a criminal prosecution, whether or not they would be able to pull off these types of things. But it certainly looks bad. When you read through the transcript, I mean, you can imagine, I'm trying to imagine this is a live hearing, and I'm sitting there watching the way that they divert and try to avoid answering questions. It makes them look very, very guilty, like they have something to hide. And that's because they do. But probably one question that Susan Rice did definitively answer, which I thought was perked my ears up, is that she was asked about what she knew about the investigations into the Trump, first the campaign, and then his transition team, and once he became president, because she was there until January 20th. And we know she was in that January 5th meeting. Now remember, these questions are happening long before we find out about the January 5th meeting. And her answer, when asked if she knew about any of these investigations into Trump and his campaign, his team, transition team, and otherwise, she said that that she never knew during her tenure as the National Security Advisor of any investigation into the Trump campaign. And then she says, I had maybe ideas or thoughts or speculation, but I never actually knew about these investigations. So there you go again. She says that she never knew. In other words, there's no actual document where as far as we know, there's no document where she's actually being briefed by Comey or by Brennan or by someone like that, or even by the president. There's no document, paper trail, as far as she knows, that would show that she was aware of all these investigations going on into Trump's campaign during the time that he was in transition or once he became president. So, again, I find this extremely difficult to believe. You've got Samantha Power and all these other people doing all these unmaskings, including her, on Trump campaign people, but she's pretending she doesn't know that there's an active investigation going on into the Trump campaign, into the transition team. That's just almost impossible to believe. But she slickly words it at the end after she says that she didn't know about any investigations going on. She then pauses and it says, but I mean, certainly I speculated on that. I thought about that. I considered that, but I didn't actually know. And that what she means there is that there's no document that you're going to find that's going to prove that she knew about all this stuff. But I'm not so sure that's the case. And of course, you don't need a document. Witness testimony is just as good. And I think that Durham would probably have no problem finding a couple witnesses who would say, yeah, Susan Rice was perfectly aware of what was going on during 2016 and even after the election in 2017. So just food for thought. If you haven't read some of these transcripts, they're there. You can read them for yourself. And I just found that to be very interesting. Now, let's get to a couple of things. Attorney General Barr just did an interview again yesterday with Brett Baer, Fox News. And he said some very interesting things. So let's just cover this very quickly. Durham, he's talking about the Durham investigation. Brett Baer asked him about the Durham investigation. And he said that even though, this is Attorney General Barr telling Brett Baer that even though the coronavirus has shut down the court system, meaning making it difficult for Durham to impanel a grand jury and have grand jury testimony is probably what he's referring to. Even though COVID has shut down the court system, Durham's team has been working very aggressively to move forward. And then Brett Baer asked him about criminal charges, is there going to be a report, and all this type of stuff. And Barr responds to that by saying that the investigation isn't being driven to produce a report. He says, we are trying to get to a point where we can hold accountable anyone who crossed the line and committed a criminal violation. He says, but there will be likely public disclosure in some form of a report. So again, he's been asked this before, and he says again, this is not about producing a report. It's about criminally prosecuting people who broke the law. And there's a little bit more on that, and we'll get to that here in just a minute. Let's move on to the next thing he's asked about. He's asked about Judge Sullivan and what's going on there. Now, I noticed that he was especially confident here when questioned about Judge Sullivan, that he believes that this is going to come to an end with the appeals court, and that they are likely going to, force the case to be dismissed against Michael Flynn, obviously because Sullivan really has no standing in this issue. He's not a prosecutor, he's a judge. And Barr repeated what he said before, that it's the executive branch which brings charges, not the courts. And then Brett Baer asked him about, he says, a lot of people are seeing this investigation go on and on. They've never seen any criminal charges. And he brings up Kevin Kleinsmith, the guy who we know altered the email saying that, Carter Page was actually an agent. He alters the email to say he was not an agent of the CIA or working with the CIA. And then Barr responds to Brett Baer by saying, look, just because no one has been charged doesn't mean the people who broke the law are going to get away with it. He says the wheels of justice grind slow. So here is Barr basically saying that people are not going to get away with the crimes. That yes, a lot of people are frustrated because no one's been charged yet, but he says wheels of justice grind slow, but the people who broke the law are not going to get away with it. And he seemed pretty confident in that answer, as well as when he was talking about Judge Sullivan. It's pretty clear from Barr's demeanor that he believes that Judge Sullivan is going to get blown out today. Today is Wednesday. He's going to get blown out in these hearings likely, and we could see a dismissal to the Flynn case today, and that would be fantastic. I don't know if they'll rule exactly today, but they certainly can, or whether they'll take a week or two to sit on it. But I think it's very likely when you watch Barr in this interview, he seems to be pretty confident that this Flynn thing is basically over. Now, he was also asked about whether or not Kevin Kleinsmith is still working at the FBI, and he just very bluntly, matter-of-factly said no. So Kevin Kleinsmith is gone from the FBI, which means now that he's been essentially fired from the FBI, it's likely that he is probably working for Durham now, or certainly he's obviously facing criminal charges, and I'm sure they're using that to try to turn him. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if Kleinsmith is cooperating with the investigation to try to lessen the charges against him, which he will certainly be facing charges. And if he's not, and if he has not been arrested by now, and I think if he wasn't cooperating, they probably would have already filed charges against him, because he's been fired for a while now. And if after being fired, they come to him and say, well, we got you basically breaking the law here, and we're going to file charges. I think if he said, well, I'm not going to cooperate, I'm going to take the rap and keep my mouth shut, I think there's no reason to hold on to him. They would have indicted him by now. But the very fact that he's been fired, he no longer works at the FBI, and in fact we know for a fact that he did commit a crime. It's not in question. The fact that he's not been charged and he's not working at the FBI anymore means that he's likely cooperating. Otherwise, there would be no reason to hold on to him. So we saw a pretty interesting, I guess you'd call it, press conference yesterday by one of the top cops in New York. And he had this press conference, and the guy really went off, and I think he made his point. It wasn't a long speech. It was a pretty short speech. But he basically made the very good point that as a cop and as one of New York's top cops, he says he's tired of seeing the cops being treated like animals and thugs, and that they need to, and the media and the politicians need to start treating them with respect. And he's specifically targeting, in his anger, the media and politicians. And there's going to be a huge blowback effect to this. Huge blowback effect to this, because just about everybody knows a cop. Everybody, like, we have 2 cops in my family. I know a couple cops. Just about everybody knows a cop, or is married to someone, who's a cop, or knows someone, a friend who's married to a cop. Just about everybody knows someone who is a cop. And they know that most of these guys just go to work every day and do their job. And a lot of times they have to do things, or being ordered to do, that they don't necessarily agree with. But they don't really have any choice. I mean, that's their job. And a lot of times your personal beliefs do not get taken into consideration. You're told to do something, you probably don't even want to do it, but that's your job. So, but most people that know some cops, I know some cops, we got 2 in the family, and one of them is pretty much an asshole. I don't really like him, but a lot of other people in the family do like him. I just don't. I think he's a slime ball. But the other person I'm speaking of is just a great guy, absolutely fantastic guy. And what you'd say, one of the good, if you're going to have an encounter with a cop, you'd want it to be this person in my family. He's a very good guy, and he's a cop for all the right reasons, and he's a very good guy. So you got good apples and bad apples, right? But everyone knows a cop, and all this stuff and hatred and things are being leveled at the cops, and I'll be the first one to come out and jump all over a crooked cop. I'm all over these crooked cops in the Spygate story. So obviously that's the case. But to just throw a blanket over the millions of cops across the country who go out every day and deal with some of the worst people in our society that I don't want to deal with and you don't want to deal with. These guys have to deal with some very nasty people. They deal with a lot of the crap in our society. And most of them do a pretty damn good job. But everyone has a bad day, and from time to time, everyone makes a mistake. From time to time, you're going to get a rogue cop, a bad apple. But the majority of people around the country are watching this very closely. And this is going to backfire, right along with many other things are going to backfire, this assault on the cops. And when you look at the Democrats, now they're trying to back away from it, but I think it's too late. I think the die has been cast. I think most people know that it's the Democratic Party, and the people they ally themselves with and join together and work with are the ones who are doing all of this, lambasting the cops and blaspheming the cops and things and such. And I think that, again, this is just one of the many things that are going to trigger a backfire. And we know that they already have figured out that this is backfiring on them, because they're now all backing away from it. Most of them, if they have any sense in their head. Now, not AOC, she's still doing that, and Omar, they're still doing that, but the majority of Democrats now, when they're pushed on the issue, are backing away. Pelosi doesn't even want to talk about it. So it's becoming a very difficult issue for the Democrats to deal with, and they own it, and it's going to come back and bite them in the ass. Then we get the story yesterday about out in Los Angeles, that nut crackpot Mayor Garcetti. We know that he's wanting to take $150 million budget away from the LAPD and put it into social programs. But at the same time, then the story comes out that a member of the LA council, city council, I guess she's a city council person, has actually been having 2 cops give her private security pretty much around the clock. 2 cops show up at 6 in the morning, they're there till 9 at night, and then they get a regular drive-by every 15 minutes by 2 officers in a cruiser. Taxpayers are paying for this. She's not paying for private security. This is LAPD. And in this particular little sector where these cops patrol, they have, I think the guy said 14 total cops in this sector, which is a fairly large sector. And 2 of the 14 are occupied, for a very big part of the day, 15, 16 hours during the day at her house. Private security. Sitting right in front of her house providing security, and she's one of the loudest voices in wanting to defund or cut department funds from the police, yet she relies on them for her personal security. Now, once this story broke in the Los Angeles media, the cops drove away, disappeared. Too late, she's busted. But this is the type of hypocrisy that you see, and this is exactly what you can expect when they talk about defunding the cops and all that kind of stuff. They're not talking about their own security. No. They'll still have taxpayer-paid private security with guns and the ability to arrest you. It's the rest of us that they want to be without any law enforcement protection. That's how these people roll. Now, we had one of the dumbest politicians on the stage, and probably why she might actually end up being the VP, Kamala Legs in the Air Harris. We had Legs in the Air Harris come out and applaud Mayor Garcetti's decision. Now, the funny thing is that the story about this corrupt councilwoman having the private police as her private security, having the public police as her private security, that story broke after Kamala Harris came out and did the interview where she endorsed the ideas of that nutbag Mayor Garcetti. And this is all going to backfire big time, believe me. There's you can just sense that there is a seething anger all across the country, and not just the country, around the world. Remember, this is a global insurrection. This is not an American insurrection. This is a global insurrection. They're all over Bolsonaro down in Brazil right now. This has been going on in Brazil now for 2 weeks as well. Same people, funded by Soros and all these groups. It's going on in Europe. And you see all these movements around the states where they want to tear down all these statues. The same thing is happening in Brazil. The same thing is happening in London. The same thing is happening in Belgium. There's a character from like the 14th century who has a statue in Belgium, and there's rioters there wanting the city to take down all these statues. They want to totally erase what it is. They want to end Western democracy and anything that reminds anyone that there once was a Western democracy. Because you don't see these people operating in Russia, Iran, North Korea, or China, where there really are serious problems with authoritarianism and police brutality and all these sorts of things, because they know if they went to China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea, that they would be squashed like bugs in the street. They wouldn't even get a second of protest out, and they would be squashed. They can do it in Western democracies because they have the freedom to do so, but they're abusing their First Amendment rights. And there are millions hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, billions probably, of people across the globe, not just here in America, who are seething with anger. But you pay a high price to come out and say anything right now. You could lose your job. You could have all sorts of other problems. You could be personally attacked. It isn't worth it for most people. But what they can do is go into the voting booth at the very next opportunity, and that's where they'll get their anger out. I'm telling you, we're going to see some major events go down in the November 2020 election. And I think the big story isn't even going to be so much the national elections. I think it's going to be what's going to happen at the local level. I think we're going to see some real serious change at the local level. I think there's a seething anger out there, and I think there's billions of people across the world who are just sitting back observing this, having to bite their lip. And the first opportunity, though, that they do get a chance to say something in this fight, it's going to be the next time there's an election. And those are coming up here in 5 months here in the States. We have elections all over Europe coming up. So I think we're going to see a lot of things happen in the 2020 elections. And I do believe probably the biggest story that may come out of it is what kind of changes that we see in local officials at the city level and the state level as well. That's something I think we need to watch for. Of course, yesterday we had Veritas release part 3 of their inside investigation into Antifa, where you actually have a guy on there, and I think a lot of these people associate themselves with Bernie Bros, where he says that the total abolition of everything is what they're seeking, including the police. There you go, folks. It couldn't be any clearer. The total abolition of everything, and what he means, everything that we hold dear in a Western democracy. The rule of law, the Constitution, all that. They want to destroy it all. The abolition of everything, including the police. So these are some serious, hardcore, tyrannical communists, and I really hope, I have no confidence in no shit Sherlock Christopher Wray, but I do think Attorney General Barr is finally awake to what kind of a threat these people are, and I do believe that Barr, being the individual he is, pretty smart guy, he knows that the way to deal with this is very quietly. Very quietly. I think this is a job for Delta Force. I think this is when you call in Delta Force and you say, okay, we've got a problem, a domestic problem. And Delta Force is the ones that they use to deal with domestic insurrections. And this is a domestic insurrection. And so I expect that we are probably going to, we'll never know about it. With Delta Force, you don't know what they're doing. In fact, if you walked up and saw someone standing right next to a guy in Delta Force, you'd never even suspect he's in the military, because he won't look like it. You'll never see a guy in Delta Force, rarely, ever, unless it's some sort of very private, closed military ceremony. You'll never see Delta Force in a military uniform. You'll never see him with a military haircut. You'll never see him using military jargon. You'll never see them around military installations. You'll never see them anywhere around like that. They operate almost like freelance, operators. They're very, very quiet about what they do. You'll never know it. Even when they've done their business, you'll never know it. They might say, well, yeah, the FBI did a good job on this investigation. Whatever. A lot of times, it wasn't even the FBI that actually went in and did the heavy lifting. A lot of times, it's Delta Force. They're like ghosts. You don't see Delta Force. They go in, they take care of business, and they get out. It's very quiet. And this is how you deal with Antifa. They need to bring in Delta Force and unravel these guys stitch by stitch. And I expect that that's exactly what's going to happen here. You'll never see it. You'll never hear about it. You'll never read about it. But it's likely how it's going to be dealt with. And if anyone ever tells you they're in Delta Force, they're lying. People in Delta Force will never tell you they're in Delta Force. Of course, we had the rotten Reverend Clinton coming out yesterday, making comments about Trump, saying how could anybody with a beating heart and a working mind still support President Trump? I would say, how can anyone with a beating heart and a working mind not support President Trump? And of course, she's being interviewed by the LA Times, and they wanted to talk about her, Hillary documentary, but all she wanted to do was talk about Trump. She will never, ever get over it. And she goes into this interview and says, yeah, well, young people who are the primary movers of the peaceful protest in response to Mr. Floyd's killing. This is a talking point that Democrats keep repeating, a peaceful protest. Well, people can clearly look on TV and look on the internet and see that, while there are elements of this thing that are peaceful protest, that's not what people are taking away from it. What people are taking away from it is burnt buildings, looted stores, beatings in the street, and total anarchist and total anarchy in general. That's what people are really taking away from it. The peaceful protests are being drowned out by the violence and the property destruction. That's what people are really seeing. And if Hillary and Democrats think that just by making these comments that people are going to just buy into that, it just shows that either they're stupid or they think we're really stupid. She says that Trump has been a failure across the board. No, Trump's been a massive success across the board. And that's obvious, again, to most people. Hillary thinks that because she says things that they automatically are la 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 la, you know, like Hillary said it, therefore let it, you know, let it be written, let it be done, sort of thing. It's like she doesn't realize that everyone, pretty much, when they hear Hillary, even people on the left, everything that comes out of her mouth, they assume is a lie, and nobody likes her anyway. Nobody cares what she has to say. She hasn't figured that out yet. The woman has no political instincts. Now, it looks like this attempt, now it's like the third attempt, but it finally looks like it has finally gotten to the point where it has now been approved. And we are talking about the petition to remove Gretchen Whitmer as governor, I believe, in Michigan. So now they have the application, the petition to remove Gretchen Whitmer. It's now been approved. They will have 60 days to collect 1 million signatures. If they collect the 1 million signatures, that will trigger a recall election. And they are working on a recall for the Attorney General as well. We also had a story yesterday in the Gateway Pundit that the Democratic Party is illegally receiving contributions from the BLM website. Apparently, when you go to the BLM website to make a donation, it puts you through to another website for an organization called Act Blue, and their money is then funneled to Democrats in the DNC. Now, the problem with this is that it's illegal, because this website, Act Blue, will receive organizations from anywhere in the world, and you can't do that. So they're taking money from places all over the world and laundering it through this Act Blue to make those donations go to the DNC, and specifically to about 15 Democrats who are named, including Bernie Sanders. Trump is planning more rallies. They're supposed to start here in about 2 weeks, and they're eyeing the new RNC convention site to possibly be Jacksonville, Florida. Remember, my friends, for every action, we learned this in science class in like 6th grade, for every action, there is an opposite reaction. In other words, all the things that you see happening right now, and all the things that have been going on, from COVID-19 to the riots and everything else, the coup and all the rest, these are all actions. And here in just a few months, there's going to be what we call an opposite reaction. You want to be watching for that, in fact, taking part in it. Here's one more interesting comment from Attorney General Barr in that interview with Brett Baer when he's asked about the riots and the Black Lives Matter thing. And this is very interesting. Barr says, when asked about it, he goes, quote, "An argument can be made that the reason Democrats are trying to stir up racial anxiety is precisely because President Trump is making concrete improvements on issues that have structural benefits to the lives of black Americans." And man, is that ever nailing it on the head. Look how Trump is improving his numbers with blacks. If the Republicans, Trump especially, can pull 20% of blacks into the Republican Party, the Democrats can simply not win national elections anymore. This is literally life or death for the Democratic Party. They must keep Trump from winning the black vote, of getting more than 10%. And it looks like he's on track to get about 20. Do you think that that could be what's driving all of this right now? Attorney General Barr seems to be indicating that very thing. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. See you. Bye.